The first eukaryotes appeared around 2 billion years ago, and there is a theory called the endosymbiotic theory that proposes that eukaryotic cells were formed when a bacterial cell was ingested by another primitive prokaryotic cell. The larger prokaryotic cell would have ingested the smaller bacterial cell by engulfing it in a process known as phagocytosis. Instead of being digested, the bacteria formed a symbiotic relationship with its host. And in biology, symbiosis or symbiotic refers to organisms that live together. Scientists believe that mitochondria and chloroplasts evolved through this process of endosymbiosis, where one species lives inside another. The evidence used to support this theory includes mitochondria and chloroplasts can make copies of themselves and split in two, just like bacteria do when they reproduce. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts can only arise from pre-existing mitochondria and chloroplasts. They can't be formed in cells that lack these organelles. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts have two membranes. The outer one is probably derived from the host membrane when it was engulfed by the bacteria, and the inner one is probably the membrane of the ingested bacteria. Mitochondria and chloroplasts are also similar in size to small bacteria. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA, which is contained in a circular molecule like that in prokaryotes. They also have RNA and ribosomes, similar to those of prokaryotes, so they can make their own proteins. And in addition, DNA analysis shows a close relationship between mitochondria and aerobic bacteria, and between chloroplasts and cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is a type of bacteria that obtain their energy through photosynthesis. It is more than likely that mitochondria evolved from bacteria that was able to carry out aerobic cellular respiration, living within a host cell. Chloroplasts are believed to have evolved from primitive bacteria that were ingested by eukaryotic cells already containing mitochondria around 1 billion years ago. This might help explain why not all eukaryotic cells contain chloroplasts, but they all contain mitochondria. Chloroplasts harness energy from light in order to produce molecules such as glucose. As a symbiotic relationship, the chloroplasts would provide glucose and energy to the host cell, and the host would provide the chloroplast with carbon dioxide and water, as well as providing protection from predators and from drying out. A eukaryotic cell that contains chloroplasts, such as those in plants, no longer needs to engulf other cells to obtain food, and this might explain why plant cells have lost the ability to change shape rapidly to engulf other cells by phagocytosis. Instead, they have developed a tough and protective cell wall. I'll explain this diagram before showing you an animation of the same thing. All prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells had a common ancestor that was a bacterial cell. Floating around, minding their own business, were aerobic bacterium and photosynthetic bacterium. The aerobic bacterium would have been ingested by another bacterial cell and eventually evolved into mitochondria that we know of today. At a later stage, the photosynthetic bacterium would have also been engulfed by the same cell and evolved into chloroplasts, which is how we would have ended up with the photosynthetic eukaryotic cells that we know today, such as those in plants and algae. Not all cells, not all eukaryotic cells, have chloroplasts, and that's because not all cells would have ingested the photosynthetic bacterium. So we end up with our non-photosynthetic eukaryotes. Of course, we also still have bacteria cells and cells that belong to the kingdom Archaea.
The eukaryotic internal membrane system, called the endoplasmic reticulum, and the nuclear envelope may have evolved from infoldings of the plasma membrane in an ancestral prokaryotic cell. Such infoldings are common in modern prokaryotic cells. The theory of endosymbiosis proposes that a critical stage in the evolution of eukaryotic cells involved endosymbiotic relationships with prokaryotic organisms. Microorganisms that live within other cells and perform specific functions for their host cells are called endosymbionts. According to the theory, energy-producing bacteria may have been engulfed by a larger primitive cell and come to reside within it, eventually evolving into what we now know as mitochondria. Photosynthetic bacteria use photosynthetic pigments embedded in internal membranes to derive energy from sunlight. These bacteria may have come to live within early eukaryotic cells, leading to the evolution of chloroplasts. Several facts provide evidence for the endosymbiotic hypothesis. A few examples include: 1. Mitochondria and chloroplasts contain their own circular DNA, similar to DNA in bacteria. 2. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts are surrounded by two membranes. The inner membrane is probably evolved from the plasma membrane of the engulfed prokaryote, while the outer membrane is probably derived from the cell membrane of the host. 3. Mitochondria are about the same size as bacteria. 4. Mitochondria appear to have been derived from purple bacteria, and chloroplasts derived from photosynthetic bacteria.